I'll tell you. Yeah. All right, everybody. I would like to welcome you guys back to Thursday Night Live. We're back in business. So season 2, last season was awesome. Lots of familiar faces, and lots of new faces, which is as exciting for us. We're excited to have a lot of new people come out this year again. Yeah, it was a great season. We're going to try to keep kind of similar to what we did last year. We did, I think, 19 episodes last year, roughly. We'll probably, if we stay on schedule, will be a few more this year than that. But yeah, we're looking to be here every Thursday night. So we're down here again at Caribou Craft Brewery, which we're very thankful again for them letting us be here. Our plan is to be here as long as we're doing this. So last year was actually quite impressive. We didn't really have any expectations on what the turnouts would be. I think our first day we had 6 people. Our last day we were over 30. So it was great to see the interest grow, and then also the online presence really jumped up as the season went on too. I think Dana added it up the other day. We were over 300,000 views throughout the entire season, which is pretty serious. So it's awesome. We got lots of people tuning in from home as well, and we really just want this. When we first talked about doing this Thursday Night Live, what did it look like for people, and what was our why for doing it? Quite simply put, we wanted somewhere where people could come, all of you guys could come to a free event. We didn't want to have to charge you to be here. We wanted you to be able to come, tie some flies, get to build a community of other fly fishermen or tyers in the city, and online, meet a lot of new people. And I know a lot of you guys have spent the summer fishing together, so every time we got to see people from here fishing together, it just makes us smile. It means that the community we've started to build is everything. So we're very excited to be doing this again this year. We're gonna, really strive. There's a lot of other places that try to do something like this, and they charge you to do it. And our motto is that we're not gonna. So we're gonna try to do that again this year. Not try, we won't. We're gonna keep it free for you again. So all skill levels are always welcome. We'll try to challenge everybody that's here every day and hopefully teach you something new. The schedule for the season is up on our website. So flyfishingbowriver.com. If you go onto there, there's a side of it that's the guiding business, but there's also the side that's our Thursday Night Live tab. If you go into that, as we go through the weeks, we'll post up the episodes as we do them. So they're linked to YouTube. So they're cached on Facebook and on YouTube once every episode's done. So you can go back and watch. So you'll have all the materials. You'll know what to use. You can go back and watch the patterns again. So that schedule will be up on flyfishingbowriver.com. Again, we've had lots of interest. Last year we talked a lot about our guide school. So heads up, you guys are the first ones to kind of hear about it. We haven't promoted yet, but we're doing 2 next year. This year was just, we could have taken a lot more, but we had to cap it at what we knew we could handle. So we're going to run 2 schools next year. So we've got up on the website, the schedule for that is there as well. So if that's something that interests you, contact us. We'd love to talk to you about it. I'll let you know what that means. Doesn't mean you have to or want to be a guide to take that schooling. Lots to learn in there. So getting back to what we're going to do today. So we're going to do a couple of more entry-level, smaller streamers that will show us some techniques that we learned kind of at the beginning of last year. We got some new tyers here, so we wanted to be able to give you something that was pretty simple, teach you a few different techniques. So a couple of the streamers we're going to do just a pretty simple bunny leech. Tied, both of our flies today are actually tied with rabbit zonker, could be pine squirrel, could be whatever. Same technique is used for each of these flies. A little bit different patterns. We'll take you through them. Stay engaged with us. There's some people that are going to be newer, so we might move a little slower at times just so we can keep people with us, because we don't want to just blow past everybody and leave people behind. That being said, had a good question. Hey, we're live. Does that mean I can't ask you a question? Not at all. Guys, this is interactive. So at home, we want you, if you're sitting there on Facebook and you're watching, you have a question for me, or you have a question at all, either Dana can answer it or I'll answer it here, so you can hear my answer. Anybody in here, don't hesitate to ask a question or ask me to slow down. Some clarification, anything you need, I can give that to you as we go, okay? This is meant to be a very interactive, experience for everybody, so don't worry about that. That being said, anything I can answer, any questions for you before we get rolling? Okay, let's dive in. So today we're going to tie kind of a classic pattern called a slump buster. which is this guy here. And then we're gonna tie a bunny leech, which is the guy we're actually gonna start with. So in your material packs, and what we're gonna continue to do this year is we're gonna give you enough flies or enough material to tie 2 flies of each pattern. So this week we're doing 2 smaller flies, so we're gonna do 2 flies, and there's enough to tie 2 of each of them. There's gonna be weeks where we maybe do some bigger streamers, or we do a pike streamer or something like that. There may be only one. We only may be doing 1 fly that week instead of 2, because some of them are going to take a lot longer to do. I like to keep this a couple hours long, maximum, hour and a half would be good. So some weeks will be a little different as we go. So starting off, we're going to start with this guy here. So this is called a bunny leech. So it's a very classic pattern. It can be transformed into multiple different sizes, right up into a pike fly. So they do a pike bunny leech. It's very similar, just on a larger scale. This one is a very good Bow River fly. We fish a lot of leech patterns. So in this color would be a leech, but we can tie, you can use this exact pattern in multiple different colors, whether it would be olive, brown, white. White is very popular too. Just a great way of getting lots of movement. This specific material has tons of movement in it, so really reacts well in the water, even being dead drifted. So just a really good pattern. So if you go into your packages, the materials we're gonna use for this first fly, very, very simple. Only going to use a couple of materials. So we got our hook. So you're going to have the smaller sized hook is the one we're going to be using for this. I believe this is like a size 10 Tiemco streamer hook. So go ahead and get that secured in your vise. So it'll be the smaller one. So you should have 2 of each size. This one will be the smaller of the 2. So what else we're going to use is, you're going to notice there's a little piece of lead wire. Beware, lead isn't always the best. You can go lead free on a lot of these materials now when it comes to this wire. We're just trying to add weight. And so some places you can't actually use, in the parks you can't use anything that's had lead on it. So be aware of that. Actually, I'm gonna back this off for a second. On this hook, we need to put the little tiny red cone head. So all I need you to do is find the pointy end of the cone head. So once you got the point of it, go ahead and stick the point of the hook right into the pointy end of the cone head and slide it right up to the eye. It should pass that bend fairly simply. You might have to force it past that barb a little bit, and then go ahead and get that secured in your vise. So the other materials, like I said, we're going to use is that lead wire, and then we're going to use that black strip of rabbit zonker. So we're going to use that black strip as well. So go ahead and pull that out. Now remembering I gave you enough for 2 flies. So if you were to take that, you don't have to cut it in half, but you should have enough for a second fly. So let's go ahead. First thing we're going to do on the hook shank is we're going to take that wire, that lead wire, so not the green wire that you have in there for the other fly, but this really malleable, kind of funny looking wire. There's a couple different ways that you can start to attach this to your hook. What I personally like to do is I'll go down to the end, the tip that I want to be farthest back, and you might as well wrap starting at the very back of the hook, because we can push it up into the cone. That's actually the main reason I'm doing this. I don't need a lot of weight on this fly, but by adding a little bit of this wire, it actually helps keep that cone up where I want it to, and it doesn't want to slide back and forth. So a lot of problems are when you have rabbit zonker that you've put onto a hook, it likes to slide up and down. It's hard to secure really tight, but if we put this wire on first, it gives purchase up against that cone and it doesn't want to slip. So I take that, I'll just grab with one finger here and I'll hold it, and then I'll start doing wraps, touching wraps up the hook shank. So use about half of what you have there. So that might be 10 or 12 wraps. Doesn't need to be a ton. And then this stuff is really easy to break. Just push on top and give it a little tug and it'll pop. I wouldn't recommend necessarily cutting it with scissors. Wire is always hard on our scissors. And then all I'm going to get you to do is to take that lead wire and push it right up into that cone. So now that cone doesn't want to move on us at all. So it's pushed right up inside of there. Then we're going to take our thread. So today, for both flies, I'm just going to use black UTC 140. You could use a 70 denier if you prefer. Black or olive to match the flies that we're doing, but black is fine. Black and olive, though, are pretty much all around are going to work for most flies. kind of the common ones we keep on hand. So then what we want to do is we want to go right behind where that lead wire stops, and we want to start our thread. So remembering when we start that thread, we're just going to keep hold of the end of our thread with our finger, go around, and the idea is that to secure it, we're wrapping back over that initial thread. Okay, and that's what's going to secure it down. So then once you get to this point, you can either break it off or take your scissors and just cut off that tag. Try to keep your mess kind of all together. And then all I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to take lots of wraps. Okay, so I'm going to do wraps all the way up onto that wire, but it's most important that before I go on the wire to make a nice little dam just behind it, so that that wire doesn't want to move back on me. Okay. So depending on your vise, if you have a rotary vise, it's really simple. If you don't, then just work it until you cover up those wraps. I'm cheating. I like a rotary vise, it makes it nice. So once we've covered up all those wraps, we don't have to make a nice smooth dam, a nice taper to the tail. We just want to get our thread to be on this specific hook. It's kind of a slower bend and a shallower bend on this hook, but we want our thread to sit right about at the barb when we're done. Okay, so right at the back there, just as the hook starts to bend. What's that?
All covered up in 10 seconds.
Yeah, it doesn't take very long with this type of vise.
Yeah, so we got to cover the wire.
As you guys look around, you see lots of different vices, lots of different tools. We had kind of had an interesting conversation. Somebody who's brand new today, I lent him a vise that's a very nice vise. He doesn't know any difference, and that's actually really good. The naivety of that is that it doesn't matter what your tools are or your vise. Eventually, if you tie a lot, you may want to upgrade, but just use what you have. It's you don't have to go too crazy. But it is kind of nice to look around and see what other people have, and maybe something you want to try out. Okay, so once we got to that point, I think we're all about there. Let's go ahead and take that rabbit strip that we have, so that black one. So what I like to do here, guys, on the back, and this may be a little bit of an unnecessary step, but if I look, you can tell on a rabbit strip that the fur wants to lay in one direction. So it's laying back this way. So we always want the fur to lay backwards. So we want the fur to look down the back of the hook. We never would want to try to force it this way, because as it hits the current, it's not going to lay back. It's not going to look right. So kind of like a feather when we're putting it on, we want to always have that fur laying to the back. Okay. Now come back to the very back end of the direction it's laying. So I can tell that it's laying in this direction. So I want to come to the back, and now look at that fur that's on the underside, or sorry, the leather piece. It's probably squared off because that's how we cut them for you today. I want you to take your scissors and just make a small little arrow out of the end of that. Again, maybe a little bit of an unnecessary step, but it gives a little bit of taper to the fur that's on top if you've done it properly. So when it's done, if you look at it there, it's just a little arrow. That's all it is. Okay? Now, when we're measuring this, we want to decide how long a tail we want. So we don't want a ridiculously long tail. We want it to be proportionate to this fly. So when I look at this hook shank, and I look at that leather on the bottom of this strip, I want to gauge it off half of the hook length. So if I take half of the hook length, that's how much leather I want to be hanging off the back of the fly. So I do a rough measurement, I look at it, okay, so now I move it down to the hook. I roughly guess where it's going to be. Now for tying this in though, I have to find that spot that I had, and I got to go separate my way through that fur. Probably one of the easiest ways to do that is to wet your fingers, and you can slick that fur down. So if you look at it like that, now that fur wants to just lay back nice and smooth. Okay, so then you can kind of readjust till you've pulled back the amount that you think you want. So that tail is still a little too long for me. Again, wet my fingers. And to get this fur to stay out of the way, we can also lick our fingers and pull that back. It'll also stay out of the way nicely. So now if I look at the bottom of that, I see that I've got that rabbit fur. I measured that I want about half of the hook length hanging off the back. I've separated that fur. So now that I can see that much is laying there, you can see that other piece wants to stand up there. I want to separate those right down to the leather. So if I don't, then all I'm going to do is trap a whole bunch of fur when I go to tie this in. So this is a bit of a technique where you have to hold it right on top of the hook. I want to call it a nice loose collecting wrap. So I'm going to go up and over. I'm not going to get super tight with it yet, because as soon as I did that, you can see it pulled the strip to the other side of the hook. So I got to come back up, level that up on top of it. Now I'm going to take it and pinch it on top and just give a little bit of a tug. Not so much to break my thread. Make a couple more wraps to secure that. Even if it slides around up on top, you should be able to reach up there with your fingers and slide that strip right back on top of the hook, because that's where we want it to stay. Okay? So just make sure that's nice and secure. Now, what's not a bad idea here, I'm not going to do it this time, but what's not a bad idea is every time you tie in this rabbit fur, touch it with a little bit of head cement. If you can really lock in that back tie-in point, there's less chance that that's going to slide on that hook. We laid down a good thread base, so it shouldn't move, but it's all those little things. You know, if you're tying a lot of these and you're using a lot of them, then you just don't want to make sure that they're not sliding around, because once they do, the hooks or the fly's kind of useless. Okay, so we're tied in. We've got, let's say, probably 5 wraps on that now. We've pulled down nice and tight. Maybe we've touched it with a little bit of head cement. It's nice and locked in. Just make sure that everybody's caught up. The tough part about head cement in this kind of fur is it's hard to just get it on the wraps and not get it all messed up in the fur. That's the only kind of sketchy part about it. Okay, so what we're gonna do from here, guys, we're now gonna use the same strip that we have tied in, and we're gonna wrap it up the hook, okay? So I want a touching wrap of that leather that's on the bottom. I don't wanna space it out too far, and I don't wanna wrap it over itself, because then I get a really built up, bulky fly. What I want it to look like is a nice taper. So if I were to pull all this fur back on this one that I've already tied, you can see that the taper is pretty good. So up at the head, it's nice and thick, because that's where I finished it off, and it tapers out to a nice form in the back. So what that's gonna look like, I'm gonna now pull up this strip so it's out of the way. I'm gonna make a few wraps right behind that strip, or sorry, right in front of that strip. Not enough to make a big dam, just enough to hold that in place. So now I've got thread that's locked it from behind and in front. And then I'm gonna take my thread all the way up to behind that cone head. How we doing, guys? Okay? Don't hesitate to ask a question or bug your buddy that's next to you. Somebody probably has an answer for you. Okay, so now that we've moved ourselves all the way up to that cone head with our thread, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, and again, use your fingers, wet them, and as I wrap this, I'm gonna continually stroke that fur so it's rearward. So that way I'm not trapping any of that fur as I wrap forward. So what that looks like for me, I actually like to kind of do it ahead of time. I'll wet up it a little bit. Just take it and turn right over the hook for that first wrap and start spiraling forward. Remember, making touching wraps. I like to pull that fur free as I go, making sure I'm not trapping any of it down. And you can tell when it's wrapping over that hook and it comes back and you're looking at it there that you're just touching the leather to itself. So we don't want to wrap up onto itself. We just want nice touching wrap as we go forward. So the part of this that kind of gets tricky, guys, is when we get right up to that cone head, it's really easy if we go too many wraps that we're not going to be able to hide that leather. Okay, so I need to just have a small little piece of leather when I cut it off that I can actually use my thread to tuck up underneath that cone head. So if I go too many wraps and it's too bulky, I'm not going to, be able to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I've come up and I've realized I'm about as close as I can get when it comes back to myself. So now to tie this off, I'm gonna have to wiggle my thread through that fur. And that can be a little bit of a process too, but you just try to separate that fur as best you can with one hand. Get that thread through, and once you got it once around, you'll kind of feel that thread slide right into that cone head. Then come back ahead of that rabbit strip and just make some securing wraps. And if you've kind of picked your spot properly, if you look at this here, I just have this strip that's gonna hang off right there. I'm gonna have to go in there and cut that as close as I can, but if I missed that securing wrap, when I cut it, it's all gonna come unwind, okay? So I wanna make sure that I definitely had wraps behind and in front of that strip when I closed it off, behind that cone head, okay? So now that I figure that I've got it fairly established in there, use your scissors, or for myself, I like to use a razor blade when I cut this stuff just because I can get really close with it. I'm just gonna reach in, only cutting that leather, okay? So we don't wanna cut the fur itself because then we're gonna lose some of the profile that we've already got. So now if I pull that back up top, you can see I got a nice taper, but what you see is I have that little piece of leather that's sitting right there. And what I wanna do is manipulate that a little bit with my thread. So I'm gonna come in there with my thread and kind of reach up onto that fur and get a tug on it. And what that just did there is, boom, it just pulled that right underneath that cone head. So then I'm just hiding the end of that strip. It's totally an aesthetic thing, and fish probably don't care at all, but for yourself, you can hide that fur by kind of grabbing it and pulling it up to the edge of that cone head. And now like that, right there, just pulled it right in, completely disappeared, okay? So now that I do that, I'm gonna make a few more wraps and I'm gonna whip finish it right there. So whatever knot you do for that whip finish, remember we wanna create that triangle. So try to show it on this side. I wanna create the triangle. So I come across, and now I've got the triangle held. Then I can go around probably 2 or 3 times and pull it tight. And I would suggest doing 2 of those. If you're doing a half hitch, if you're gonna do a half hitch, which is just simply a single overhand knot, then I would do at least 3 of those, okay? Then you can snip off that line and touch it with a little bit of head cement, and that's as complicated as that fly gets. Very, very basic fly, but it's such a killer pattern. Can tie it on many, many different sizes. Something we'll probably show you in the next couple weeks is how we also tie some of these patterns with a trailing hook. So another way of doing this is tying it on a shank and then actually having that hook placed back in the tail of that leather, which allows you to maybe, I mean, people will say you're gonna get a short strike maybe on some things. A fly this size, I'm not worried about a short strike at all. But if, let's say our fly is maybe another inch or 2 longer, there is that potential. If the tail is too long, that they might short strike at it, so we can put a trailing hook back in there. If we end up tying an intruder in the next couple weeks, I'll show you how to do that and to set one of those up. So once we're in it like that, I kind of like to take my scissors or a comb or whatever and just kind of pick out some of that fur, make sure you didn't trap any of it down. And a really good way of checking to see what you think of it, again, wet your fingers, just like it would be in the water, pull it rearward and see the profile that you get out of it. And I can see there I got a nice taper right from the head back to the tail. Looks pretty good. And that is a very, very simple pattern using some simple techniques, but can be very effective. Again, could be tied in multiple colors. Great streamer on our local water, especially in the winter, guys. We don't, a lot of people really like to chuck the biggest meat they can, and I'm a little guilty for it. I love chucking big streamers, but it's really unnecessary on the large majority of the year. This time of year, if you're nymphing with a leech, you could nymph a leech like this, or if you're swinging it, something nice and slow. This type of material has lots of action in the water, so you don't need to be stripping it fast. Fish wants to pick it up nice and slow. They won't move very far for it. If it comes in front of them, boom, it's on. Okay? Any questions about that pattern, any of the techniques that we used on it? How are we doing, Eleanor? Awesome. Yeah? Oh, boom. So this is just a bunny leech. Bunny leech, yep. very small bunny leech, yeah. Yeah, they can be tied a lot bigger. Some people put some crystal flash out the tail, so it's got a little bit of flash in it. Yeah. And another way of doing it too, guys, is you could tie the tail in with one color, and then you could wrap.
I'm born and raised in Calgary.
My name is Brandon Esposito. I'm from Airdrie, Alberta.
My name's Scott. I live in Cochrane, work in Cochrane, raised my family in Cochrane.
Rob Camara, born and raised in Calgary.
My name's Spencer Hockley. I'm from Simcoe, Ontario.
My name is Nathan Camara. I'm from Calgary. I was born and raised here. What I'm looking to learn from guide school is just to better myself and my understanding of fly fishing, how I can help others learn and improve them.
Okay, so when you're thinking about taking the boat out here, what are the things you're gonna mentally check off?
Where the anchor is.
Yep. Right. Right. What about other boats? It's always people always forget about the boats upstream. Those are the ones most got to worry about. So always check, see, am I clear upstream? Right. I'm not impeding anybody's fishing as they come down. And then you got your hazards. Great. Another good habit to get into is say, just before you're about to take off, okay guides, we're about to take off, keep braced. What's nice about the graphite rod, the shafts, a lot of them are so, like on yours, extremely stiff. Yeah, and over time, your elbow and your shoulders, just through repetition.
Just looking for a more broader understanding of fly fishing and sort of a bit of mentorship in that aspect.
About how to control my boat, how to get my friends and family that are riding with me into fish, and have a little more fun doing it.
I just felt this connection, like you were doing things right, like, and so I was like, yeah, this is the crew that, you know, I want to kind of.
And you guys walk the talk, which is also good to see, right? Because you know, I see it all the time. It's easy to say and easy to, you know, say this is what we're going to do, and then when it's not convenient or when no one's looking, that's not the case. So.
Just looking, like whether you're making your own sandwiches or going in. My clients both today commented on how nice it was to pick up that fresh sandwich. So, and to know that it was just made.
Nothing surprised me, like shocked me or whatever, but it was just very informative and learning a lot. Like that. I guess what surprises, there's a lot of information. Like it's just not so simple, right? That's yeah. That was surprising.
And I recommend it to everybody. I actually do. I recommend it. It's the most perfect thing in the world. If you're really into fishing and you really want to get into this, I do recommend coming down here and spending the time with Dana and the boys, and you will get top-notch learning experience, I think, and the biggest bang for your buck. When you're going out there, you're not being a jackass just trying to fish the waters and not knowing what you're doing. You're actually getting a set of values right from the boat launch till the moment you get out of the water. It's nothing but learning. It was awesome.
See kind of how that, so you can draw that back. Hey Brucey. I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm pretty much trying to wrap the whole hook, like not overlapping the leather though?
Not overlapping the leather. So you want to keep just enough tension that it's tight. But see how we've loosened this off a little bit. Here, I'll tighten that up so it doesn't.
Oh, that's how that works. I see. I didn't know that was a feature.
It's all right.
It's ugly.
There, yep, so just keep wrapping. Yep, and then just wrap it right up to the head.
Brush this back, I see.
Probably get one more little half wrap in there.
Yeah,
good, and now you know, because you've been going this direction, you need to bring your thread up and over and lock that in place.
So this guy coming up, does it matter where I go, or do I have to get the thread out of the way?
So keep going over and snug it in right there. Good. And now pull that back and make some wraps right in that cone.
Am I just adding some volume
just
there?
adding some volume there. Just making sure it's good and secure. Good. Now just reach in and cut off that fur as close to the cone head as you can. But just cut at the leather.
Right there?
Yep.
Is there sort of a technique to going in there?
Just reach in and do it.
Commit.
Yeah, just like that. There you go. Now take a few more wraps just to make sure it's nice and secured in there. Good, yeah. Perfect. Now, whip finish is something that's not easy to teach.
Is that the thing that you did with that one tool that you had there?
Yeah. Do you have, let me see, grab this one for me. Something that's a little easier when you're starting is this. So what you do is you take this, wrap it around once, twice, bring it up here, push that up and over, and snug it down. So all it did was a double knot. So I went once, twice, put that right on the eye of the hook.
And then you finish.
And then I just made sure that that thread went over behind the eye or behind that cone and snugged it down. And now that can't move on you. So that's a good tool for doing that. And then you can snip it off. There you go, first tie flat.
Hey, thank you very kindly for helping.
No problem. Sometimes you just gotta kind of see it and feel it. And okay, guys, I think we're probably all pretty caught up. So if you go back into that package now, you have a little bit bigger hook. So this time we're gonna tie on a size 6. This is a 2X, 4X long, just a must-add streamer hook, okay? So you also have those large gold beads in there. So if you look at the bead, on one side it's got a smaller hole than the other side. You wanna stick the point of your hook into the smaller hole, okay? And then feed that right up to the eye of the hook again, just like we did at the last one. Secure that in your vise when you're done. We'll get going on this one. So what the materials we're gonna use for this is you're gonna have a little, there should have been a little bit of green BR sized wire. We're gonna use a little bit of this crystal flat, Mylar Crystal Flash, and we're gonna use that olive green colored Zonker. Again, a fairly simple pattern with very few materials. So go ahead and get your thread started on the hook. So what we want to do is start our thread right behind that bead. Get it good and secured, and then we just want to lay a really nice thread base down on the hook. So if we're tying in anything on a hook, it's really easy to slide around, especially with some of the materials we're using today. So by just laying a nice thread base down all the way to the bend of the hook, just making sure you get something for the materials to have traction on. And then we want to finish at the back of the hook, basically where we did last time. So we want to finish right more or less at the barb. Actually, that's not true. We're gonna come back up to the bead. I forgot about this part. Psych.
This is a test, you passed.
I'm testing myself. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take that piece of green wire. Yeah. Just flying, man. I gotta drill all this hook up here. Turbo. Okay, so we want to take that piece of wire and we actually want to tuck it right up into that bead. So you got a little bit of, you don't want to push it so it comes right out the eye of the hook, but you want to push it just inside the bead. Just take a gathering wrap and we want to keep that right on top of the hook shank all the way to the back, just securing that down. Okay? And right at the very back of the bend, we want to allow our last wrap to kind of push that wire just to the back side of the hook. Okay? And then we're going to take our thread and come back forward again. Just nice open spiral.
Is that right to the bend?
Yep, right to the bend. So we want that wire to be as far back as our thread was. Right at the back. Yep, that green wire.
Can I cut that or can I rip it apart?
You're gonna end up cutting it. Those are my scissors, so borrow your buddies next to you. Just, you don't need to worry about cutting it. We'll cut it once we're done. So just leave it nice and long. All the way back to the bend of the hook with the wire, and then bring your thread back forward. So this fly is going to be a little different in that the way we secure our rabbit strip down is actually going to be secured with the wire. So it's a little bit different style of doing it. Kind of a neat little trick. I love it. There's just all the trash talk over here. Mine looks way better than yours. Okay guys, next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take that Mylar Cristofash and we're gonna start it just behind the eye of the hook, or sorry, just behind that bead. Take a nice securing wrap to get it in. Make sure it's nice and locked down, and then just some nice open spirals. Same thing, right back to the back, right where we left the wire. And then again, go ahead and bring your thread back forward. And you can leave your thread probably about a hook. So we measure things off of the hook all the time. So if I say a hook gap width, that means the width from the hook point to the shaft of the hook. If I say a hook eye length, that means I'm measuring off that hook eye, I'm looking at that opening, and that's how much space I'm going to give behind something. So if I say hook eye space, 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, that's what I'm measuring off of. Most of the time we gauge things off the gap of the hook or off the shank of the hook. For this specific time, we're gonna leave our thread, I'm gonna say a hook eye behind the bead. So you look at that hook eye, you gauge what that distance would be, and leave it that much behind the bead. Okay? So once we got that flash, or that Mylar nice and snug there, I'm gonna, just like I did with that rabbit fur on the last one, I'm just gonna take it and wrap it forward. So making sure I got touching wraps so I cover up all my thread that I just laid down. We're just gonna take it and wrap it forward. Don't forget, for you guys at home, if you have any questions for us, just let us know. We'll answer them the best we can. Give us a shout out from wherever you're at. It's kind of fun to see people tuning in from all over the place. And we're gonna tie that off, that same kind of hook eye length behind. So I want just a little bit of space behind that bead eye. And then I'm gonna reach in there and I'm gonna snip out that remainder of that Mylar.
Don't go all the way to the hook. I'm going to give it an eye length behind, so back up a little bit. Too much? Yeah, I'd back up a bit more. Yeah, if you crowd yourself too much, it gets right there. Yeah, that's perfect.
How are we doing, guys? So you're gonna notice with this olive color is actually a little thicker and a little bit longer than the black was. And that's actually gonna make this fly even a little tougher. to secure. So what we're actually gonna do here, guys, is we're gonna use that wire that we tied in. We're gonna actually use that wrapping up through the fur of the rabbit strip. That's what we're gonna secure that to the top of the hook with. We're not gonna use our thread. We're not gonna tie it in at the back. It's kind of a cool technique because let's say, for instance, on a stimulator, you know, when we tie it in, we tie wire to the back, then we wrap up our hackle, and we have to use that wire to secure our hackle as we go back. So it's a good way of learning a technique just on a bigger fly, where it's not as critical. We're using bigger wire. But in lots of flies we tie, we actually secure stuff with the other material that we put in. It's kind of the way that things flow up and down a hook shank. Things can change. This is just one of the techniques we use, okay? So this is actually a bit of a bugger to do, but what we're gonna do, so measuring for our tail again. So I'm gonna take that rabbit strip, again, looking at the leather, and I want half of this hook shank again in length of leather hanging off the back. So I lay it on there, flip this over so you can see a little better. So I lay that on there. What I want is to take roughly half of that hook shank in length, mark it, and then lay that behind the hook shank, okay? Turn it over, that's the distance I want. So I want a decently long tail, but not too long. So how I'm gonna make this initial one, and this initial one's probably the most crucial because this actually has to secure that back piece of the fly in place. I gotta now reach in and pull back, and you'll see that how the fibers lay back on this fur, they're actually attached way farther up than where you start pulling. So it's good to take a bobbin or a pair of scissors, and you can reach in there and just kind of pluck out that fur so you can separate it a little better. Because you want to be able to separate it so you can get your wire in there. It's kind of hard to do with just your fingers, but once you've got the spot that you want, this initial one's the worst one. So again, if you take your fingers and you wet that, and you pull it down, you can get it to kind of slim out for you in both directions. This stuff is nasty. If you get it in your mouth, it's hard to get out, but yeah. Noted. Duly noted. Okay, so I've separated it. I've got the length of tail that I want. That's roughly half of the length of that hook shank. I'm happy with it. Now I'm gonna take that wire that I have and I'm gonna go up and over, kind of holding the rabbit on top, just like I did when I used my thread to do it. Reaching under. If you have the availability of getting your thread or your bobbin out of the way, on this vise I have that option. It's a lot nicer to work with when you're doing this just because you're not bumping up against it all the time. If you can't, it's not a big deal, but if you have the option to do it, this would be a good time to do it. So I'm gonna lay that wire over top. That first wrap, you want it to be nice and tight, trying to hold that rabbit strip right on top of the hook shank, and you're gonna pull it down. Now, that's not secured completely. That's just one wrap. We're not gonna do another second wrap over that spot like we would with thread, but if you pull nice and tight on that wire, it obviously bends to the curve of the hook. So it kind of holds it in place for you there. So some of this, we actually are gonna manage that fur on top of the hook as we start getting more wraps through. So now my job is I come in and I say, okay, where's my next open wrap gonna be? I'm gonna go back into that fur and I'm gonna find another hole to lay that wire through. So I'm gonna create another hole. So you're like a few mils, like not much at all. So not super tight wraps, you want them nice and open spiral. The toughest part is making sure you don't lay down on top of the fur that you've already got in place there. So in actuality, you're not very far ahead in the fur than the last one. Go ahead and make the next wrap. You are gonna trap some fur, guys, that's just inevitable, but you're gonna have other fur laying down on top of it that's gonna kind of hide some of that. And we can kind of pluck some of it out of the way as we go. So then you're just gonna continue that sequence. You're gonna pick another hole through the fur, lay down your next wrap, and just keep slowly making open spirals up towards that bead. And just doing your best to keep that wire as tight as you can. Okay, you're gonna know if it's not tight enough because stuff's gonna feel like it's slipping. and you are gonna lay some of the fur down. So just be okay with that, because that's what's gonna happen. And having a long enough piece of wire to actually get a good purchase on is key here. That's why I told you not to cut it, so you could actually get a good grip on it. Yeah, it's a neat technique, guys. This is actually probably harder than doing it with hackle, because you got to weave your way through everything. I'm going to say you're probably going to be about 6 wraps by the time you're done. And now remembering, we're not going to go right tight to the bead with this, like how I showed you where we stopped that hook eye length behind. That's what we're going to stop again. Okay, so we want to make sure we leave ourselves just a little bit of room, and I'll show you why. So once you think you've got that last wrap in place, you want to take a gathering wrap with your thread to lock that wire in, because the wire is the only thing holding that fur in place. So I've got that wire up now. I'm going to take kind of one, I like to hold that fur back once I'm done and do one full wrap with that wire around the hook shank. Then I'm going to bring my thread back and make sure that I secure that wire. Taking a nice few wraps to get it tightened down. And then reach in there with your scissors or a pair of wire cutters. When you're cutting wire, guys, it isn't great for scissors, but what you want to savor about your scissors is the tips. That's what you use the most when you're trying to work in delicate situations. So if you reach in and cut that wire farther back in your scissors, it will save your scissors longevity. Okay?
You can also, if you've secured it enough, you can actually just take the wire and
helicopter it off. Yep.
That's usually what I do, because although I do have a pair of junk scissors.
Having a pair of junk scissors is a great idea. So once I've got that secured down and I'm pretty happy with it, you're gonna see I've got lots of rogue fur in here. We're gonna go and trim some of that out if it's not gonna get out of the way. But what we need to do first here is we need to cut. Take your scissors or whatever you do to cut, and we're gonna cut that fur now. Really make sure that you've got that wire secured, because once you make this cut, it's all over. Okay? And then what you can do is that should have exposed just the very front edge of that leather, and I'm gonna take my thread over top of that and secure it down nicely. Make a nice few thread wraps over top of it. So it's gonna look like so. So then I like to wet my fingers, stroke the fur backwards so I can see what I'm working with. So kind of the goal of this, guys, in the original Slump Buster pattern, you then actually take another piece of rabbit fur and you create an entire collar out of it. I have a little bit different methodology how I like to do it, which I'm gonna show you. But for now, what I want you to do is, to this point, just make sure you have that little bit of space behind the eye. Check out what your fly is gonna look like by pulling it back. The goal of this is we put in that nice mylar and we put that nice green wire as our wraps. We wanna show that off to the fish, right? We did that work. So if we just cover that up, if we were to put a big collar on here, and the reason I don't like to put a full collar is that it covers up so much of that. So we put in that nice little bit of flash on the belly. I'm gonna preserve that, and I'll show you how I like to do that. Trim out that rogue. Okay, so that should have us up just behind the bead. We should have that fur secured on with that wire. We've learned a new technique. We're happy with how miserable it was, and we won't use it again for a while. It takes a few times of doing this technique to kind of get the good feel for it. But you will find, as you tie more and more, there's certain patterns where it's actually really an effective technique. Okay, so you should have been left over now with some fur. Well, I gave you enough for 2 flies, so you'll definitely have some left over. What I like to do is I'm gonna take, let's say, maybe like, I don't even know. Just take a generous clump. So you can do it a couple ways. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna cut that fur off of that leather. So for me, this short little piece here, I'm just gonna go in and cut the leather. to the size that I want. So I've just got this little piece of leather on there, guys. Not a very big tuft at all, just a small little tuft. Now I'm gonna go and I'm gonna grab all of that fur and hold it back from the leather. So I've got that little leather piece now hanging out at the back. And I'm gonna reach in there and I'm just gonna cut that fur just above the leather. So now I wanna keep those tips fairly aligned as I can. We're gonna trim them out in the end, but I wanna keep that nice tuft of fur in my hand. So once you've cut a piece and you've got it in your fingers, don't let it go, because if you let it go, it's gonna be hard to gather back up again. So what we're gonna do is, instead of making a collar that goes all the way around, we're gonna lay a collar that just goes on half of the hook, so the top half of the hook. It's kind of the same technique that we would use with deer hair. I'm gonna show you how we can spread it out a little bit after we put it on. So it's about as aligned as we can get. I'm gonna go ahead and lay that down so I can see it laying across the top of the hook, top of the fly. Now I'm gonna switch hands, okay? I'm just gonna use my pointer finger and my thumb, and I'm gonna come back in here and I'm gonna grab it and hold it in place, okay? It's gonna hang out over that bead just a smidge, and that's okay, because what I don't wanna do is go so far down the hook that I'm actually gonna miss out on some of that fur. So I'm gonna take one gathering wrap, just one, lay my thread down a little bit. I'll take one more. So I've got 2 very light wraps, okay? 2 very light. I haven't done much with it. I'm just leaving the tension of the bobbin to hold that fur on top right now. Now how I can achieve that so that I get a little bit more of a collar than right now it's just right on top is I'm gonna go in and take my thumb and lay it right on top of that fur. I'm gonna press down and I'm just gonna kind of squish it on. And I'm gonna kind of squeak it back and forth. And by doing that, I now, as you can see, have moved that fur halfway around the hook. Okay? So and if it's a little uneven, you can look at it and even it out with your fingers, but essentially now we've created that collar on only half of the hook. It's staying up top. Now I want to secure that with a couple more nice tight wraps. Okay? Tighten down so that collar's not going to go anywhere. And then I've got all that little bit of junk up here at the top. I'm just going to reach in and trim it out as close as I can. And once I've done that, I still got a little bit of it hanging up. I'm just gonna take some thread wraps and cover it up. Create a little bit of a collar with my thread. Okay? Once I've done that, I've got a nice little black collar up top there now. You can take your fingers, soak it down a little bit, pull it back so you can see now I've got a little bit more robust looking head. It's a little bit bigger than the rest of the body, so we've created a nice shift in profile. Nice big head tapers out into the tail. And if I flip it upside down, I'm still getting to see all of that nice mylar that I put in there with the wrap of the wire. Okay? And now that we've done that, all we got to do is whip finish. Whip finish it, touch it with some head cement. Do a 3 or 4 turn whip finish. One more for good measure. On these flies, we're not really worried about using, on smaller flies, we might only do 1 whip finish and then touch it with head cement, just because we're worried about how much thread we're bulking up. On a fly like this, we're not too worried about it. Make sure it's nice and secure. And we can touch it with some head cement. And that, guys, is your slump buster. Another nice swinging streamer. Great looking little pattern. Ultimately, you can vary the colors on this in so many different ways. You can change up the belly color, change up the collar. Could have the body be one color of fur and then go with a darker collar. Just so many options you can do with these guys. Again, not a super heavy fly, so could fish it in lots of different ways, but a nice streamer to be swung, especially if you've got some type of sink tip on to get a little closer to the bottom. Any questions on that one, guys? Looks good, guys. I think everybody caught up pretty good. If you've got a comb with you, not a bad idea to comb it all out, making sure the fur is going backwards, but a good wet at your fingers, it's about as good. Looks good. I'll just check on you guys here for a sec, see what's up. Yeah?
Shit, yeah.
Look at this, you're ready to catch fish. That looks good, man.
Are
Really
the
good.
fish ready to be caught, though?
Probably not as much as you're ready to fish them. How are you doing, guys?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Tim.
Tim. Craig.
Craig, nice to meet you.
How you doing, Cody?
Cody, nice to meet you, Cody.
I'm Martin.
Martin, nice to meet you. Ren is good. Yeah.
She's got a new hat, I saw.
Yeah, she loves it. Yeah, it's kind of a cool little hat. Had a guy make it for her. She's pretty obsessed with the brown trout, so.
I follow you guys on Instagram.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
Yeah, we have lots of fun.
I know. I'm a little jealous.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm just thankful to have someone who wants to go with me, so I can't argue with that.
The problem is I try to find people to go with and they're always busy.
Oh yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, when you got time and nobody else does.
Yeah, my kids are starting to get into it now too, so
Good.
they wanted to go this year for the first time. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Create the most positive experience for them, and hopefully they want to keep going.
It's the hardest part, right?
Yeah.
And I just tightened up the tension on the line and let them just flop it in.
Yeah.
This is actually not bad. She casts pretty good. So.
Doesn't have to be pretty.
There's a guy at Okotoks, he's building custom fly rods.
Yeah.
The school I teach at, he's like, I'll probably do a group of 10 kids. We'll do it for $60 each.
Nice.
So I said to my two, would you be game? Yeah. Huh?
Yeah. Awesome. Got them. That's all you need. Get them hooked.
That's the whole part. So.
My daughter loves catching fish. Doesn't have the patience.
No. Everybody likes the catching of the fish. It's the waiting around for them to be caught that's the hard part. Okay, guys. That is our 2 flies for the evening. No worries, guys. Thanks for coming out. We'll be here next Thursday and every Thursday after until we tell you that we're not going to be here. So we'll take a little bit of break at Christmas, but yeah, fishing season's over, guys. Don't even bother. Well, thanks everybody for showing up again tonight. For all of you at home who tuned in, thank you for tuning in, watching. Like I said, we'll be here for the next Forever Thursdays. Look forward to having you guys part of this. Just because we're done for the evening doesn't mean you can't ask some more questions on there. We'll hang out here for a bit, guys. Help you through tying those other flies you have here if you'd like. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys again next week. Thanks guys. So I'm Tim here, Fly Fishing Board Outfitters. See you next week. Yeah, flies for sale, flies for sale.